by MentisWave, honest take on Project 2025. Let's check it out.
It's going to take hours. If Asari is waiting for you, do this another day.
Hey, internets.
Why would my mom be waiting for me? We're not playing Helldivers today. We're playing Helldivers on Sunday. Again.
Reading the news or watching any mass media pundits for the current election cycle this year, you've probably heard of something called Project 2025. This is a plan for
I've heard about it way too much. People won't stop talking about this thing.
Presented in a roughly just over 922-page book, which was created by the Heritage Foundation, titled 2025.
Episode 1083. I forgot to ping Discord. Okay, there, I pinged Discord. SMH.
Mandate for Leadership. Now, recently, I decided to read this book, and that's what this video is going to be about. In this video, I'm going to give an honest summary of what this Project 2025 is actually about, go over the pros and cons of some of the stuff that's actually in the mandate, and refute some of the mainstream media propaganda and fear-mongering about Project 2025.
Spoiler alert, mainstream media is lying. No, really? Wow.
Because, surprise, surprise, mass media has once again not been very honest with you on this topic. In fact, if you get your information...
You know what's crazy? So I remember a long time ago, so this was like 20... I had my aunt visit from Japan. And my aunt is my really cool aunt. You know the one that sang the Waifu Wars opening? That aunt. She's like really cool. Like she came over, we watched anime together and stuff. She came over here and she was like, oh yeah, man, Trump is so bad. He did like all these things. Like, look at all these bad things that Trump did. And I was like, wait, where did you hear that? Right? Because I was like curious. I was like, what makes you think that? Right? And it turns out that the rest of the world, so we only think about like, whenever we think about it, like, you know, as people from like America, we think about like the news media, right? We think about, okay, you got NBC, you've got your CNNs, you got your Fox, right? You got all that, right? In other countries, they only get CNN. So CNN is like their source, besides like their own local media that's like doesn't really give a shit usually about like, you know, American stuff. Their only source of news is CNN for American stuff. So like if they hear anything about America, it's from the lens of CNN, right? So I was like, oh, that's why you think that. That's crazy. Doesn't the BBC cover American stuff? They might. I don't know. But that's what she told me is like, oh, like, yeah, like we get CNN. That's the one that we get in like Japan. So it kind of made me think like, oh, that's why. Which is why like X is like so huge, because X is like people get their news from X now rather than the mainstream media. They're like really losing power. Like the mainstream media, it's like you want news, it's like X or YouTube. And I guess VTubers if you're here. It's like people don't really get it anymore except for like old people, I guess. Most people don't look at it anymore. Anyway.
From just watching cable TV news, chances are pretty good that everything you've heard about Project 2025 was an extreme over-exaggeration or cherry-picking or some...
Sorry, I'm pausing again. But see, do you see like kind of what I mean? If you're not from America and like your only source of news is CNN, then like of course you would think all that shit, right?
Other form of dishonest reporting. Because one of the things I noticed when I was about 1/4 through this book is I started to realize that it's pretty darn obvious that the vast majority of mainstream media pundits, as well as breadtube leftists on YouTube and whatnot, bringing up their various grievances about this project, have very clearly not read it at all. I don't think any of the pundits on CNN have read it. I don't think any of the pundits on MSNBC have read it. Pretty much every single talking head you've seen whining about this book have not actually read it. And if you just so happen to have read this book as well, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Which is unfortunate, really. It kind of shows the problem with mass media today, as well as the problem with just general political commentators, is that a lot of people see nothing wrong with commentating on a political plan that they clearly have not read. Due to the extreme mainstream media bias, I am again partnering with Ground News. Mass media narratives these days rarely come without bias.
I was thinking about getting this thing, the Ground News.
One of the endless examples. And Ground News helps you see through this bias by going through thousands of news articles and organizing them for you in ways that give context on where their political bias lies. For example, let's look up Project 2025 using their search feature. There's been a lot of heat about this topic, and Ground News has compiled hundreds of articles with a convenient graph.
PG just says, I love Ground News. Like, should I get it? Is it worth it? Do you think it's worth?
Showing the political leaning of where the articles are coming from. Using this, we can easily see at a single glance that most of the Project 2025 hype is actually coming from mostly just the center left, telling you that the topic itself is likely loaded with a hint of partisan bias before taking it too seriously. You can also see simplified summaries for each article generated to save you even more time. Another feature related to this is blind spot. It lets you see which stories are being over or underreported by the left or right. This is an extremely useful feature due to the fact that reporting bias and agenda setting is one of the most common forms of mass media manipulation, and Ground News provides this extremely easy way to see through it and know which stories are being unreasonably amplified or ignored. Like this one right here. Confidence in the media falls to new low ahead of presidential election, disproportionately ignored by left-leaning outlets. Gee, I wonder why that could be. Ground News also has a lot of good features like these bias distribution charts for every topic, giving a quick visual representation of news outlets and their political leanings. Lastly, Ground News is independent and subscriber funded, so to get the same features I have, you can go to ground.news/MentisWave or scan my QR code to get 40% off the Vantage plan.
How much does it cost? $50 a year. Oh man, that's a lot of money though.
And which grants you unlimited access. Now, first off, I'm just going to give you a brief
If it was $50, like not 50% off, and like I knew they weren't going to charge, they were going to up the price like later, maybe I'd do it. But
this book, which is actually kind of difficult to do because this mandate behind Project 2025 is actually quite complex. But to put it into an extreme nutshell,
gameplay in the
provides
background?
a framework plan to take power away from the managerial class within the administrative state, and then either redistribute that power to the president or consolidate and combine various agencies into one agency. And much of the content of Mandate for Leadership can be summarized as a
Mega Man X was such a good game. Holy fuck. I remember playing that for the first time after playing like Mega Man 2, and then I played Mega Man X, and I was like, dude, this game is crazy. What the fuck?
conservative critique of the fact that too much power is currently in the hands of thousands of state-chosen bureaucratic elites, mostly put into power by the DNC, and that most of these bureaucrats are implementing...
Okay, I kind of like this guy.
extreme far-left agenda that most Americans would not be okay with if they understood what was really going on. And it tries to accomplish this by going into very comprehensive detail what various government bureaucracies do, what various agencies do, what a lot of these three-letter agencies do, and how and if they can be reformed, as well as various legal reforms. So here's just a brief...
So not familiar with this guy yet? He's a real one? No, not really. Honestly, like, I'm really glad you guys are introducing me to, like, a bunch of new people. Like, I really liked Shu when you guys showed me Shu. Like, yeah, keep sending me, like, new people.
Summary. Mandate for Leadership is broken down into 5 sections, each with chapters detailing wide-scale reforms on dozens of government agencies. The first section, Taking the Reins of Government, is centered around the claim that the greatest threat to America is coming from within, and that this threat is in the form of a massive net of unaccountable government bureaucracy.
Wait, but that's true, though. Okay, hold on. So I know a lot of people have told me, like, actually I lost a friend over this. Did you guys know that? I lost a friend over this fact where I basically said that this was very dangerous and that it was a huge threat. And one of my friends got mad at me for that. The reason why it's so dangerous is because you have a bunch of unaccountable people who have power, right? Like, because you don't vote for these people. If it's true that there are a lot of unaccountable bureaucratic people that have, like, most of the power and they're making laws out of whole cloth, not really laws, regulations, right? They're making them out of, like, whole cloth, then yeah, that's a big problem. That's really dangerous, right? I don't see how it wouldn't be dangerous.
Goes over how the people that are chosen for White House staff greatly affect the presidency and a president's ability to enact...
Real friends don't hate you just because you have different opinions. I guess that's true. Doesn't make me feel good about it, though. You know, like, it doesn't make me feel good about it. It's like, I don't know. I don't hate people over their opinions, even if they don't agree with me. I just can't. I can't parse that in my mind.
Their agenda, since it's impossible for one single person to possibly manage the complex tasks of the White House without delegation of some sort. So it goes into the chiefs of staff and duties of various advisors, various committee members, and the details of what they do, etc., etc.
Sorry, I think it's because I think I'm able to, well, I don't know if this is a good thing. Some people might think this is a bad thing, but when people do things like consider to be evil, I don't necessarily think that they're doing it on purpose. Because I think a lot of the time, a lot of people trick themselves into doing evil things, and that's the nature of evil. People that are evil never start out by believing that they're evil. Does that make sense? You're not a bad person. You're a good friend. You're just wrong sometimes. You know what, Crimbo? Same thing. You're wrong sometimes. I think you're wrong, Crimbo. Yeah, the whole good intentions things, I think people start from that point. That's not to be saying, like, I don't think that there are people that are evil. I definitely think that there are people that are evil. There are people that they have this initial thought of like, oh, I'm gonna do something because I think it's the good thing, the right thing to do, and it's good. And then they become corrupted by it. Does that make sense? Like, for instance, like, you know, there's Crimbo here. I don't agree with Crimbo on almost everything. Me and Crimbo disagree on like almost nearly everything. I'd say like 95% of policy we disagree on. And I'm still friends with him, and I'm friends with Chaos, and I disagree with Chaos on a lot of things. Me and Shy don't agree on everything either. Me and Saberwolf don't agree on everything either. In fact, I think I have more friends I disagree with than I do agree with, actually, now that I think about it. Most of my friends I disagree with. I'd say it's about, for every 3 friends I disagree with almost everything on, I have like 1 that I agree with for the most part. Should I need to start disagreeing more often? And so like what I think is like people, they initially start off from like a point of like being kind and nice to other people, but then they justify it. Like people find ways to justify it. Like, for instance, I don't think Hitler thought he was evil. When he started out, no, they didn't think that they were evil at all. They thought they were doing the right thing, right? And it always starts off that way, I think. And then you slowly get corrupted by like whatever the evil is.
Disagreements on things. It'd be really boring if we were exactly the same. We can at least have some things we can all agree on. This coming from an evil man.
Thank you for the bits. Thank you, Joel. But yeah, people start off, they always think that they're always the hero, right, of their story. And this is why I think philosophy is so important. It's important to actually sit down and think about, because how would you know? How do you prevent yourself from falling into that? How do you prevent yourself from being corrupted by like by evil if you don't like actually if you don't actually think about if you don't think through your philosophy and through your morals, then how do you even know? How could you possibly know? You're going to be even easier to corrupt if you don't do that. If you don't have people challenging you on your stuff. Evil is subjective. I don't really agree with that. I don't think so. But the more you hurt people to get, well, the thing is what is evil and what is good? I mean, I don't want to go into this because this is a really deep kind of, this is going to cause like a whole different discussion. I'm just going to touch on it lightly and I'm going to move on because I don't want to go deep on this topic. I think that morality is religious in nature, basically. I don't think like you can have like a objective morality without religion. I don't think it's possible. But anyway, I don't want to go into that because that's it's going to take forever to talk about that. But yeah, it's people thinking that they're doing the right thing, and then it slowly corrupts them, and then and then you start to justify things. Well, I'm doing this for the greater good. Then you just start to have like these small little corruptions that take you over, and that's what turns people evil. I think eventually you become the villain, but you don't realize it until you're already the villain. And then a lot of people can't handle that mentally, and then they break down, and then you have psychos basically at that point.
It explains how many members' duties overlap in ways that create confusion and inefficiency, as well as various ideas to reduce this inefficiency and bring down costs. It makes the argument that the president is supposed to have more direct power over the executive branch, and it uses the Constitution to try and justify this. And also explains why this is currently not the case, to such a degree that three-letter agencies can actually go rogue and subversively work against the president if they so choose. And this creates a very big problem because it causes an internal conflict that results in massive amounts of money wasted as taxpayers are basically funding bureaucrats to intentionally not do their jobs. And it also explains what some of these bureaucrats do, complains it is too difficult in the modern era to fire them.
By the way, when I say I hate the government, this is what I mean. I don't like the bureaucrats. That's who I really, really don't like.
And in general is a critique of a lot of how the power structures work. In many ways, the first section kind of struck me as a form of Moldbug light, in that it gives strong critique of invisible power structures created by bureaucracy, and how they allow middle officials to easily get away with
basically regulation. There's like that picture is so funny. They're given the power to regulate, which they can use to create like laws that aren't really laws. They don't actually vote on it or anything. They just make it up.
corruption, subversion, and just general backstabbing, sabotage, tomfoolery that they would not be able to get away with if more people were paying attention to their actions. Now, this kind of creates a problem where people may not know who is at fault for when things go wrong. The common man's knee-jerk reaction is to blame the president, but in reality, when you have an organization as massive and complex as the United States government, which is broken into hundreds of different agencies and bureaucracies and etc., it actually works more like a series of tens of thousands of calls.
Yo, this game looks sick. What the hell? I should play this game. This looks really cool.
Different agencies, all that kind of have to work in tandem to get things done. So the truth is that many problems in function are often caused by the actions of faceless bureaucrats rather than the direct leader. The difference here is Moldbug goes more into...
So that's what I mean. Like, you don't actually vote for... Like, you don't vote for them, right? They make rules and they make laws out of whole cloth, and they're not representative.
Depth in the philosophy and history behind this, and use it as a demonstration of the failures of democracy to weed out corruption, and as a justification for reinstated monarchy as the primary system of rule. Whereas mandate for leadership...
Wait, what did you say?
...is a justification and uses the leader. The difference here is Moldbug goes more into depth in the philosophy and history behind this, and uses it as a demonstration of the failures of democracy to weed out corruption, and as a justification for reinstated monarchy as the primary system of rule. Whereas mandate for leadership, or Project 2025, doesn't do that. Project 2025 is not arguing in favor of a dictatorship or arguing in favor of monarchy. It does not do that. Rather, mandate...
I don't know, a good monarch would be pretty based. Would solve all our problems.
For leadership is more or less a soft version of this. Shut down some of the worst offending government agencies and restaff the rest with those who are loyal to the president, and consolidate and combine various agencies to make it less complex, and of course less wasteful of resources. And that these elected officials, including the president, would be limited more by the Constitution and would be loyal to the Constitution. At least that's their theory.
Again, like I said, the problem with it is that the good leader dies, and then the next leader sucks ass, and then history.
Project 2025 also isn't really arguing for an increase to the power of government, but rather is an argument for restructuring it so that the people who are...
It would be ideal if you could guarantee a good king/queen, whatever. I don't give a fuck. If you can guarantee like a good ruler, it would be the best, basically. But
actually elected are the ones who have more of a say.
Every political system has weaknesses. In fact, the funny thing is I feel like at least the founding fathers' idea of the governing system is actually built. It's actually built understanding that there are weaknesses, that humanity is flawed in general, and it assumes a lot of these things in the way that it's created. It was basically a no-trust government system created by people that don't trust the government.
Weird fusion of democracy and monarchy with an oversimplified...
It was like meant to make it hard to do anything, like on purpose.
Theory behind it that putting more power into the hands of the elected rather than a managerial class bureaucracy thus returns power to the people.
Sorry, a little bit of a tangent, but that's why like the electoral college exists, for instance. And it's why America is not a direct democracy, because they understood that in a direct democracy, it's very easy for people to not be represented.
Hence why I call it Moldbug Light. So Project 2025 is more like a return to the 80s strategy, believing it can reform democracy back to some recondite former glory that it allegedly had. Then in Section 2, the Common Defense was about reforming the military and foreign affairs to be more aligned with conservative interests. For instance, it criticized the Department of Defense for wasteful spending, and argues for reforms based on the peace...
Yeah, I mean, there might be wasteful spending. It's hard to say.
Strength strategy and increasing accountability at the higher ranks of the military. It also identifies...
Yeah, dude, can we get some accountability in the freaking higher ranks of the military? Like, what the fuck? Right? Like, what the fuck?
China as sort of the main major...
The fact that, dude, dude, so many of these people are just not accountable. Like, they're in charge of, like, absolute fucking, like, ridiculous disasters. Like, unmitigated disasters, and they're just like, they just stay there forever. If you did that shit in like the private sector, you'd get fired like instantly. You know what I mean? Like, what the fuck, man?
Threat to United States, and to reform the military around this assessment. It also floats the idea of dismantling the DHS, or Department of Homeland Security, and...
Dude, who thought it was a good idea to leave all of our allies behind and fucking just give them all our weapons? Give the terrorists all of our weapons. Like, yeah, you know, our weapons are really expensive weapons. Let's just fucking leave them here. Like, who the Who the fuck made that call? You what? And then they're like, they just get to keep their job? Like, are you fucking kidding me? Yeah, I made a goddamn loot cave over there. Freaking ridiculous, man. And the thing you have to understand is, like, we had much better shit than, like, they did. And now they have our shit. Can you imagine this shit? Like if you were, like, imagine this in, like, a fantasy setting. You had, like, a trove of magic weapons, right? The other enemy, your enemy, is using fucking clubs and stones. And you're like, yeah, you know our magic weapons? Let's just fucking leave them here. Are you fucking kidding me?
Consolidating and combining several agencies as well as privatization of some of them. And it largely argues for more border control and the merging of government agencies that deal with immigration, such as combining ICE with
it seems good. I mean, I don't know, like the fact that there's just people like in mass just walking across the border, that seems like a fucking problem. It seems kind of basic.
Agencies that deal with immigration, as well as new policies that they claim will improve expedited removal of the illegals and raising the bar for asylum seekers to prevent.
Wait, hold up. I haven't heard anything bad yet. Did you guys hear anything bad? Because I didn't. Wait a minute. Is Project 2025 actually based? Hold on.
And abuse of the system. It also justifies greater immigration control by accusing Mexico of being run as a
I thought it was really bad.
Cartel state, effectively accusing them of being controlled by the cartels, as well as general conservative desires such as preventing Iran from gaining nukes, and stricter foreign policy against Russia, North Korea, Iran, etc. It also talks about reforming foreign aid, or USAID, to be more about charity and less about politics. It accuses the Biden administration of using foreign aid as a sort of soft bribery. So it argues for a reduction to this funding and a reduction to foreign aid in general, but to at least pre-COVID levels, and criticizes Biden's climate change policies that are built into it. It also argues for a complete
I mean, I think it depends. I don't know on this one. This one depends.
Of all U.S. aid in regards to DEI programs. That's something that a mandate for leadership in Project 2025 is pretty heavy.
Hot take. I don't think there should be any DEI in the military. The military is about kicking fucking ass. That's all. That's it. That's their entire job. Their entire job is to be like really fucking strong, scare the shit out of everybody, and fuck shit up when they have to. There's no reason. There is no reason to intentionally weaken the military with DEI. It's stupid.
Heavy on. Anytime it runs into DEI within any of the agencies,
any sort of DEI thing should be strictly merit-based. Like they should have a clear thing. Like, okay, if we add this thing, it will specifically make us stronger. Like that needs to be like the thing. Like for instance, oh, never mind. I'm going. This is going to take too long.
It goes pretty heavy-handed into wanting it to be removed. Anyway, the next section was about general welfare.
DEI can't be merit-based. Yes, you're right. Actually, you're right. I don't mean. Sorry, I didn't even really mean DI. I mean, if we wanted to like add people specifically for some characteristic, it would be because that characteristic is beneficial to us. Does that make sense? It should never be about specifically that they have a different characteristic. That characteristic should be specifically beneficial for us to like pursue it. In which case, it isn't DEI. So yeah, you are right on that.
Fair. It's welfare spending and the national debt, and it also argues for shutting the DOE down and returning education to state control, as well as partially abolishing the FBI, not shutting.
That one makes sense because the problem with a federal system, like for things like this, is, and this might be kind of hard to understand if you're from a different country, but America is really fucking big, and each community is culturally different. Like different states have different cultures and different ways of life, different problems. And making like these big sweeping rules on a federal level doesn't make sense for things like that because you have to address everyone, every culture and every problem. You have to address it specifically. In making like broad like strokes doesn't really like fix much. It's better if it's more accountable at a local level.
It down completely, but just getting rid of the
people who say that women can pull a trigger too is no. Okay, so there's two. Okay, you know, I wasn't going to go into this, but I will. There's two different things with like women in the military. One, they lower standards. I don't think they should lower standards in order for women to be in the combat role. I think that's a very bad idea because there's a reason why there's these standards for combat. Women are physically weaker. That's just biology. Sorry, man. Just nerfed. I don't know. I don't know. Blame the devs. But women are just like, they just have lower strength stat than lower strength and strength and con stat, I guess, than men. And because of that, just better physical stats, men could do more physically. They can exert more physical force in like different ways, right? In order to have women in those positions, they have to lower the standards in order to have women able to compete on this level, right? So first of all, that's already a bad thing. But then here's another question: is say she does pass the bar. Say we set a standard bar, and a woman is physically fit and capable enough to fulfill her duties, like in a male role, right? Then you have to ask a secondary question. What does that do to the actual squad structures and to like morale and effectiveness? Because women are mentally different, a lot of distinct challenges, like, women have periods and all that, and obviously there's the sex aspect, right? And I'm not saying that's necessarily bad. I don't know the answer to that, but we should find out. Like, is it going to affect things? If it is going to affect things, then like I think you could make a logical, non-sexist argument for not having women in the military. Does that make sense? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if that's true or not, but we should look into it. Right? I don't think it's sexist to like look into that and try to see, because all I'm concerned with, and I know this is crazy, but all I'm concerned with is how much ass can we kick? How do we get the highest ranked military? And how do we get the most frags? That's what I care about. All right. Like, I want the highest KD ratios like in the world when it comes to like our squad. We're going to fucking dominate everybody and like nobody's going to be able to do anything. That's all I care about. I want people to FF before they even see us there. If removing women from that makes that the case, then I think we should do it. That's how I feel about it. And again, like there's other roles women could do in the military. Like you can have like, you can have, God, I was literally about to say like nurses and cooks. There's other roles too. Like maybe like women can be drone operators, for instance. Maybe like women are better at that. You can have women doing like what do you call it? POV drones or something like POV drones or something. Right? I mean, if women can do that, then let them do that, right? I don't have a problem with that. But again, we should consider like what's the best for like our military in terms of its function. The function of the military is to kick ass. And if we don't do that, then why are we making ourselves weaker? It doesn't make any sense. Like, why are we doing this?
FBI's ability to investigate themselves and discover that they did nothing wrong, and reducing their scope to be about crime only. Now, it's important to point out here that when they say shutting down the Department of Education, they don't actually mean shutting down education. I'll go a bit more into that when I get into debunking some of the problems.
Dude, honestly, like, women might get kind of buffed in the next patch. I'm just saying. The current patch is definitely like male oriented, but I think women will get a little bit buffed in the next patch. Once we have like drone warfare and everybody is like hooked up to like a fucking VR headset, and that's the entire thing is just that. And like maybe, dude. All right, hear me out, guys. I'm gonna tell you like okay, if I was the president, okay, do you want to know what my policy would be for military equality? You ready to hear me out, guys? Hear me out. Elect me president. We're building mechs. Fast tracking like straight to Gundams so that women can be equal in combat. That's how I feel about it, guys. Give every woman a Gundam and then we got this. You know what I mean?
Propaganda around Project 2025, but it's not actually getting rid of education funding. Rather, instead, it's more of a return to the Friedmanite idea of public funding, but local control as opposed to Fed control. So it argues strongly
said you just want a Gundam. Listen, it's equality. It's equality.
In favor of school choice and increased competition in the field of education rather than getting rid of education. So anybody who tells you that Project 2025 is about just education and by shutting down the Department of Education and they leave it at that, they're taking it out of context. This section also shows some data on how equity policies since Obama have led to a noticeable decline in literacy, as well as some for math. And it also argues for defining sex and education-based agencies as what was assigned at birth by a doctor. So there's definitely some conservative ideas against gender ideology. And
wait, hold on. I gotta like back up a bit.
Friedmanite idea of public funding, but local control as opposed to Fed control. So it argues strongly in favor of school choice and increased competition.
School choice is good. Mm-hmm.
Field of education rather than getting rid of education. So anybody who tells you that Project 2020.
Why is it people don't like monopolies, but when it comes to school, they want a monopoly? I don't fucking get that. Why do people like that?
5 is about just dismantling education and by shutting down the Department of Education and they leave it at that, they're taking it out of context. This section also shows some data on how equity policies since Obama have led to a noticeable decline in literacy, as well as some for math. And it also argues for defining sex and education-based agencies as what was assigned at birth by a doctor. So there's definitely some conservative ideas against gender
I don't know.
Ideology in here as well. And in regards to the
Who cares
Department of
about
Energy,
that?
it argues for eliminating ESG and green-based regulations, as well as just tons and tons and tons of reforms. That's another important thing to understand about Project 2025, is that it suggests a lot
But again, I don't think kids should be involved in that kind of shit in the first place. So like maybe, I don't know.
reforms,
I don't really
such
care.
as reforming the HUD and reducing its spending and ending all equity programs like PAVE or AFFH. It also massively criticized the Department of Justice of being hijacked by a predominantly leftist managerial class and details several examples of abuse of power, such as providing misleading information to social media owners. So Facebook, Twitter, etc. It also argues for a thorough review of nearly all of these agencies' policies and to abolish anything that doesn't align with American interests, although it doesn't really go into good detail what it means by
Why do people hate like the idea that America should be looking out for itself? I don't fucking get that. Duh. Like, we're fucking America. We should care about America first. Like, what the fuck? What the fuck?
that, but probably meeting conservative interests. Then Section 4 in regards to the economy was about, of course, you probably guessed, reforming the economy to be more in line with general GOP desires, including less power to the IRS.
Isolationism is cringe. I didn't say anything about isolation. I didn't say anything about isolationism. I just think that America we should consider ourselves number one.
And overall less taxation, but again, reforming rather than outright abolishing. With the exception of the Fed, it does float the idea to consider abolishing the Federal Reserve.
Basically, the way I see it is that if we help other people, we're doing it and you better appreciate it. That's how I feel about it. We should take care of ourselves. We should do what we can to like make the world a better place, but we need to take care of ourselves first. And when our people are suffering, like we need to like really consider that like as a priority.
And to adopt a policy of free banking in its place, with a potential return to the gold standard. And once again, it's arguing for reforming a whole lot of agencies, such as reforming the Small Business Administration.
I kind of like that because I don't like the idea that like they can just make more money and make everyone else's money worth less so that they can have more. They're effectively stealing from us if you think about it. When they print more money, they're stealing from us. They're literally stealing from you.
To be more in line with conservative loyalists. Now, one interesting thing about the economy section is that it gave
Malcolm.
ideas
I'll check
for
it out
both
later.
a fair trade version, protectionism or fair trade, and free trade vision. And that kind of stood out to me, that they kind of gave a case for both. Because it shows you that the people behind Project 2025 know that no one's going to actually agree with everything in the book. It's extremely unlikely for all of these reforms to actually happen. Mainly because, if you actually read the book, you realize just how complex and in extreme detail it goes.
That's fucking 800 pages.
Into how these things will be reformed. It is an insane...
See, this is why I like to argue like individual points and like individual, like the philosophy is like an individual thing that's like an individual thought rather than like, oh my God, Project 2025. It's like, well, what do you mean? I don't know what that means. Yeah, the book, 800 pages. Like, well, did you read it? Because now we both have to read it. What I mean is like, you know how people will argue like Project 2025, oh, well, do you believe in Project 2025? It's like, well, I didn't read it. Did you read it? Because now in order for us to have a conversation about it, we both have to read it. Does that make sense? Rather than like, you give me a point and then we'll discuss that specific point, right? It's a lot easier to discuss an individual point that's like divorced from like this giant like 800 page thing.
Massive amount of work to do. And I kind of personally doubt that any one president could actually do Project 2025, even if they made it their sole purpose for being in office. Then finally in Section 5, it talks about independent regulatory agencies. So it goes into reforming a lot of agencies, just as the FCC, and criticizes the current issue that presidents can appoint people to these various regulatory agencies, but cannot remove them, which then leads to widespread abuse. So you have a ton of these regulators who are basically accountable to no one. And well, that's identified as a problem. So again, it floats.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. I guess like the closest parallel to that would be like the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court is kind of like, it's like done on purpose specifically for the Supreme Court.
The idea of abolishing some of them, but mostly
I like
consolidating, combining, and reforming. In fact, if I were to summarize a lot of Project 2025 and the book A Mandate for Leadership, the way the book largely reads is something like this. here's a bad thing happening, here's what this government agency currently does, and here's how we should reform them. And the book just kind of repeats that format for dozens upon dozens of various government agencies. But overall, the goal that they claim to have can be found on page 36. It brings up 4 broad fronts that will decide America's future.
Okay, here we go. This is probably what people have a problem with.
1, restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. 2,
in general, yeah, but again, see, this is the problem with this. When you say restore the family as a centerpiece of American life and protect our children, it's like, what does that mean? Right? Both sides do this, by the way. Like even the left, they like have some broad like ideal that you're like, oh, I can agree with that, but it's like, what does it mean specifically? Like, for instance, a good example is we should stop school shootings. It's like, oh, okay, that sounds great. Yeah, so give us power. Like, oh, wait, what are you gonna do with it? Right? Like it yeah.
2, dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. 3, defend our nation's sovereignty.
I mean, these sound great, but what does it mean?
And 4, secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls.
This seems like very basic, like broad takes, that they all sound good.
The blessings of liberty. That's how the Heritage Foundation is selling it anyway. But anyways, next up, I'd like to go into a little bit of criticism I have about this book. There are some...
I don't know how you really disagree with that, I guess, unless you hate families. Which I can see that. I can see people hating that.
Mandate that are less than amazing. In fact, this is one of the reasons I know that most leftists have not read this book at all, because there are actually some better critiques against it that most of them have largely ignored. Now, the first problem is that Mandate for Leadership doesn't always do a very good job of providing data as graphs to back up its claims. It does cite sources, and it does a very good job doing that, but there's only a couple times in the book where it actually shows graphs.
Dude, this game looks so sick. Looks so good.
Mostly only doing that when it went into education and testing scores over time. But it didn't do it enough, and so the book kind of appears to just be making wide claims and assuming that they're true. And I didn't really see any lefties pointing that out, which again is not surprising because of course they haven't actually read the book. But yeah, anyways, another criticism I have is there's not enough reduction of government power. Instead, it's mostly just a reconsolidation. Again, a ridiculous portion.
I don't like that, yeah. I agree with this point.
Of Mandate for Leadership can be summarized as more reforms. This is
I want government to have less power.
This is what this law does. Reform. Hundreds of pages of that. It is interesting. I will give it that. There's very few books out there that actually do as good of a job as this book in briefly describing what certain agencies do. So anyone who's interested in how the United States government works to some degree...
That's actually really interesting. Actually, I might read this.
Actually would recommend reading this.
800 pages, though. That's so many pages.
Look, it's pretty good in that.
I might fall asleep. Is there an audiobook of this? Is there a Project 2025 audiobook? Hold on. Oh shit, there is one. Wait, how long is this? Oh, this is very long.
But it also does that and goes on and on and on. This is what this agency does. This is how it should be reformed. This is what this agency does. This is how it should be reformed.
Many hours, yeah, like about that.
More reforms. And to some degree, that's a problem because a lot of these agencies really can't be reformed.
Let's just say it's so long, it's broken up into chapters. It's not like a whole book.
They should just be outright abolished. For example, in Chapter 8 on page 245, it acknowledges the fact that the United States Agency for Global Media has been arguably, well, a total waste of taxpayer money for decades. Okay, well, if that's the case, then why not just get rid of them? These agencies clearly aren't doing anything necessary for the nation to function, as proven by the fact that we are clearly doing just fine without them functioning. If some bureaucracy or 3-letter agency has been clearly not doing anything useful for decades at a time, then well, that's proof that you don't need the agency. So the better option is to just abolish them and return the resources that were taken to fund them back to the taxpayer. That's kind of my main critique of Project 2025, is that it's trying too hard to save sinking ships. When in reality, we should just let them fail. We should let them sink. We don't need them. If it's wasting money and not
I agree with this
anything,
guy.
Just get rid of it. This is sadly kind of the main difference between Republicans and right-wing libertarians. Republicans always fall for this idea that they can save these statist projects, when in reality, we can just get rid of them. Why does the government need to have a hand in media at all on the taxpayer's dime? You don't need state-funded radio shows targeted at foreigners, because if people did actually want it, then they would pay for it voluntarily, rather than costing the taxpayer hundreds of millions of dollars to fund a radio show that we don't care about. Now, to the mandate's credit, Project 2025 does recognize that it's possible to just abolish it if they can't reform it. The problem is they get it backwards. They place reforming first.
It's like 30x something.
first instead of abolishing first, when really they should be looking if it's realistically possible to abolish things first, which creates a little bit of a problem because it makes it very easy.
It's like 30xx. Yeah.
For dishonest people on the far left to cherry pick this book and represent it as being authoritarian, because a lot of the ideas essentially boil down to kick Democrats out of bureaucratic control and put Republicans in control. Now, in truth, when they do that, it's not actually an increase to government, it's just changing who's in charge.
Yep.
And again, taking the entire book in context, overall this mandate is arguing for an overall reduction in government power. But again, that's not going to stop the disingenuous cherry pickers. And it would be a lot easier for people like me to call out that dishonesty if the strategy was more focused on abolishing corrupt bureaucracies, rather than just trying to take control of them. And that may seem like a really generic take coming from a libertarian like me, but again, if you look at a lot of the leftist disinformation campaigns against Project 2025, well, I'm right. They make a lot of pedantically correct statements against Project 2025. They're wrong, of course, and it's very obvious when you actually read the book again that they're wrong. But the problem is, they know that most people aren't actually going to read this book. Because admittedly, it's not the easiest read, and the only thing that really keeps it interesting is that it's an explanation of how various agencies work from a conservative standpoint, which is something that you don't really see very often. So at least from a literary standpoint, that for me was really the main part of the book, and really the only thing that stopped me from falling asleep on it. But again, because a lot of the focus is just on change the D's here to R's, it's not really offering a good enough principled stance against anything, which makes it very easy for the entire plan to be attacked. And another problem is that there's an obvious disconnect between what Trump is saying at his rallies and his debate and town hall performances and whatnot, and what is in Project 2025's mandate.
Who's that? Who's that behind me? Who's that?
For leadership book. In other words, Trump himself not only has distanced himself from Project 2025, but if you've read the book and you listen to Trump, you realize that it really isn't Trump's policy. It's very obvious if you're a person who's read this book and you listen to Trump speak every now and then, that Project 2025 is in fact not secretly Trump's agenda at all. Because as it turns out, it's pretty darn obvious that Trump hasn't read the book either. Because the book does a fairly decent job criticizing invisible power structures and bureaucracy, and if Trump had read the book, he would at least
didn't read.
Job as this book. He would at least be borrowing
not
from
MAGA
the book. And I know this isn't really criticism of the book itself. It's just worth pointing out that it's actually pretty obvious that it's not really as hardly connected to Trump as the media wants to say that it is. Now, to be fair, I'm aware that this is more criticism of Donald Trump than it is criticism of Project 2025. It's just worth pointing out that there's some obvious communication issues within the GOP leadership due to the fact that Trump himself doesn't really seem to understand this massive project that a bunch of these conservative think tanks have come up with, which then leads to some real criticism, which means that Project 2025, a mandate for leadership, is more or less just a suggestion at best. There's a lot of big-name conservatives behind it, so there's a good chance that if Trump were to get into office that some of the things would happen, but it would almost certainly be a very, very, very small fraction. In other words, the book is not as important as people think it is. If it was actually a serious part of Trump's agenda, you would expect there to be a much greater level of overlap with Trump's rhetoric and what's in the book. I mean, there's definitely some overlap, and I'll get into that later, but the overlap that exists is more coincidental.
It's weird though. Like, why are they pushing it so hard then? I don't get it.
Than anything else. And that's mainly.
Is it just because it's like it's so long that you can't read it? That it's like, well, if we make up shit about it, no one's gonna cross-check it anyway because it's 800 pages.
Just how extensive this project is. But of course, none of the leftists complaining about Project 2025 would have noticed that because of course none of them have read the book either. Another criticism I have is that it recommends a lot of large-scale military projects and increase to funding, like building hundreds of more ships and fighter jets, despite its criticism of wasteful spending. So basically Chapter 4 sucks. Another problem is that it occasionally makes the Republican...
Oh, it depends. What's it for? Right? Like, do we need to do that? Like do we need that? Do we need to tech up to still be the best? I do think that military spending is actually like kind of important, to be honest. I know it's not really, probably not what a lot of people want to hear, but I think it's important that we are the best military because I care about America and I care about that like anybody that even tries to face us just gets obliterated. That's what I care about. So it depends if we need it or not, I think, but we should try to keep on the cutting edge, I think.
Fallacy of arguing for internal socialism as opposed to open border socialism, which admittedly internal socialism is less bad than open border socialism.
Shai says our tech from the 70s and 80s is generally stronger than the rest of the world stuff. True, but like if we get lazy and we get complacent, then that's how you get passed up, right? Like the tortoise and the hare story, right?
because you can't have open border socialism. That'll pretty much drain the coffers immediately, but they do argue for it. For example, on page 167, we get this little line right here, ensuring that only U.S. citizens and lawful...
But see, what I think, though, is rather than increasing the amount of money that the military gets, because I think they get a pretty good amount of money, I think rather than increasing that or decreasing it, I think what we should do is just increase efficiency. Because they're very clearly, very obviously spending money on bullshit, obviously. And they need to stop that shit and like actually like work on tech rather than, you know, whatever the hell like, you know, touchy-feely grab ass that they're doing.
Permanent residents utilize or occupy federally subsidized housing, when really we just shouldn't have federally subsidized housing, as subsidized housing tends to increase the cost of housing for people who are not on subsidized housing. It hurts the housing crisis rather than fixes it. And lastly, in many ways, Project 2025 is too complex for its own good. It regularly goes into extreme detail of its plans on what department or agency should do what.
That wasn't a dig at gay people, by the way, if you're... Just in case someone tries to cancel me off of that. I was talking about how like in sports teams, they like do that at the end of the, you know, in the locker room and they freaking slap each other's asses. That's what I'm talking about.
Or how it should be reconstructed to do some new thing.
Fuck you, crazy.
Or how it should be combined with some other agency to the point where it becomes a little bit outrageous. Because, again, remember, Project 2025 is, at best, a suggestion. Trump is under no obligation whatsoever to follow it. It's not actually his policy proposal.
And for the record, by the way, I don't think they should have that in the military anyway. Even if it is gay people, there shouldn't be any touchy, grabby ass feely. All right, none of that shit.
But the proposal of various think tanks...
Keep that shit for VR chat.
And thus, even if Trump wins, and even if he does put some of the contributors to the mandate for leadership book in his team, one can only realistically expect a very small fraction of these ideas put forth to actually be put into action. Even if Trump were to...
no barracks buddies? No? Okay, hear me out. If you could prove that it will increase military effectiveness, then we can talk about it, okay, guys?
Gears and be serious.
Then we can talk about it.
2025, because there's just so many reforms.
Then we can put the horse to work.
It's recommended in this book that it would be almost darn near impossible to actually implement them all in a single term. Or in other words, it's just a little bit too ambitious for its own good. And I know for sure it's definitely not going to be able to implement.
Hey man, don't hate on me. I'm not the one that I don't think that's a good idea. I don't like that stuff. I'm not the one advocating for sex work being like a good thing. Okay, that's not me. I'm using their own law, their own logic, okay?
All of its ideas, even if it were to gain the power needed to do so, because some of them are just really unpopular. For instance, it suggests rejoining the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and that's just a flat-out no. TPP has a lot of stuff in it that would require an expansion of the surveillance state for it to actually work. It's a massive scam to the average consumer. There's a reason people didn't like it, and it's a good thing that Trump pulled out of it. Now, on the flip side, there are, however, some really good things in Project 2025. For example, it crashes down pretty hard on disparate impact.
Leaf speaks for the whores. She is the Warlax.
Eliminate disparate impact as a valid theory of discrimination for race and other bases under Title VII and other laws. That is a very good thing. I've kind of floated that before as a sort of compromise between right libertarians and Republicans when it comes to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Abolishing disparate impact wouldn't completely restore freedom of association, so it wouldn't be perfect, but abolishing the disparate impact standard is pretty good because it at the very least prevents the law from being abused by far leftist and other neo-Marxist activists. Mm-hmm. So that's a very good idea. And just in general, the book also explains that it needs to have a very heavy-handed removal of Marxist indoctrination where it can. And another good thing about the book, just in general, which is something I wasn't expecting to find when I jumped into it, is that it's actually, again, one of the most comprehensive explanations of how various agencies in the federal government work. While this was what this agency and this institution does, and this is how it can be reformed sort of rhetoric that you see.
Let's look at this. What my friends think I do, what society thinks I do, what my boss thinks I do, what my parents think I do, what I think I do, and what I really do.
Throughout the book can seem a little bit...
The thing is there are some good people that are like in the government, but it's like, man, there's a lot of people that aren't, and you can't get rid of them, you know?
repetitive at times. On the flip side, it does provide a fairly good explanation of what these agencies do if you're not familiar with them. So if you're interested in what various bureaucracies within the federal government actually do and what their function actually is, this book is a pretty darn good read. And it also floats a few other base things in it. For instance, it does float the idea of abolishing the Fed and returning to the gold standard, or free banking. And it also advocates for privatizing certain agencies such as the TSA. And again, I really liked how it went into abolishing the Department of Education. The federal government really doesn't need a place in education at all. And these days, the DOE mainly just serves as an indoctrination pipeline. And finally, probably the best thing is that overall, it does argue for more deregulation and consolidating and removing agencies more so than it argues for increasing the federal government. And it does identify...
Did they say TSA? Privatizing TSA?
That overall, it does argue for more place in education at all. It advocates for privatizing certain agencies such as the TSA. And again,
how would that work? Because you have to use them, right? But what happens if they? I guess there's no difference, because they fucking suck. You know, my favorite is, have you guys seen those shirts that say I fucking love these. Like, have you guys seen these shirts? Hold on. These are the best fucking shirts. It's not gay if it's TSA. That shit's so funny. That one's kind of hard because, like, what's going to happen? You can't, like, pick a different TSA they go through, right? It's like, how are they going to do it? It's like a security thing. How do you privatize it? Like, what are you supposed to do? Like, if you contract, like, other people to do it, like, you can't really kick them out. You can't really decline service. Airports used to run them, yeah, but the reason why the TSA exists is to have, like, standardized like detection of, like, threat, right? It's like, how would that work? Because if you privatize it, it's not like you can pick a different one to go to.
Really liked how it went into abolishing the Department of Education. The federal government really doesn't...
Wait, the more things are privatized, the more they have personal control of it. They have a lot of control over it right now. The government has a lot of control over it right now. I don't know what the answer is to that one. It's kind of rough. I don't know.
Need a place in education at all. And these days, the DOE mainly just serves as an indoctrination pipeline.
It's kind of like
finally,
police, almost.
The best thing is that overall, it does argue for...
It's kind of like police, but you can't even hire, like, private security. It's rough. That's, like, a weird one, actually. Because it kind of has to be standardized, because otherwise... if it's not standardized, it's effectively useless. So at that point, just disband the whole thing and just never do it again. But people are concerned about, like, airport security, so it's like, how do you do that, but also privatize it? The private company would have the standardization within itself. But see, the thing is like, if they're concerned, I don't know if it would change anything. I guess they would be leaner. I guess that's what would be the difference. I'm thinking from the point of view of, like, the experience for myself. But I guess they would be leaner if you did do that. I want them to make it not a shitty experience to, like, go through it. Like, it's so fucking annoying to, like, go to the airport. Like, I hate it. Freaking going there and then they get all touchy-feely on you. Like, I hate it.
More deregulation and consolidating and removing agencies more so than it argues for...
I fucking hate people touching me.
Increasing the federal government. And it does identify a few things about times of regulation that have led to problems and supply issues. For example, it correctly identifies how overregulation has led to a supply issue. And what this means is that even if we were to pretend like Project 2025 and the book Mandate for Leadership actually is Trump's agenda, compared to what Kamala Harris is selling, it's still the lesser of two evils. Project 2020, in fact, not some evil, newtsy, whooshist takeover of the American government. Unless you're dealing with one of those people who believes that newtsyism is when Republicans control the United States government instead of Democrats controlling the United States government, which is completely ridiculous and an obviously unserious argument. And speaking of the ridiculous, I would like to end this video with going over and refuting some nonsensical mainstream media propaganda and fear-mongering about this project. Because before I read the book, I could tell that the media was lying about it, but now that I have read the book, it is quite painfully obvious that just about everything mass media has to say about it is completely disconnected from reality and has little to nothing to do with what the Heritage Foundation is actually pushing for here. The first of these is just this blatant association fallacy coming from CNN, where it says that, hey, 140 people worked for Trump and they're involved with Project 2025, therefore Trump is lying about claiming to not know who's behind the project. Therefore, Project 2025 must secretly ooga booga booga be Trump's actual agenda. Fear, 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 be afraid. Now, the problem with this is that Project 2025 has contributions from over 60 conservative think tanks and hundreds of independent contributors. And of course, each of those think tanks often have hundreds of members of their own. And again, lots and lots and lots of people have worked for Donald Trump. So it's actually not statistically amazing at all that there's about 140 people who have an overlap here. It would actually be very unlikely for there to be nobody who worked for Trump who was also involved with Project 2025 in some way.
That's
it's
true.
not uncommon at all for people who work for various think tanks of a party to be put into various bureaucratic positions or something by a president of that party. So CNN is being completely ridiculous here, and that they're taking something that is statistically expected and presenting it in this very fallacious way as to imply that there's some secret nefarious conspiracy happening here. It is entirely within reasonable expectation for this to probably just be a coincidence.
Well, the thing is too is when something is like 800 pages long, how do you agree with, like, there's obviously going to be things that you disagree with.
It doesn't actually mean anything. And then the same exact thing is
And
true
things
when
that
it
you
comes
agree
to
with.
policy overlap with Donald Trump's platform and Project 2025. Again, it would be very statistically unlikely for Trump's plan to have absolutely nothing in common with the plan of a bunch of dozens of the conservative think tanks.
That's what I was saying.
So the fact that there's some overlap between what Trump's platform is and what's in Project 2025 is entirely expected, and again, is entirely within reason to just expect it to be a coincidence. You could do the exact same thing with Harris's platform or with Biden's platform, or really with any DNC person's platform. You can just as easily take their plan and then compare it to the ideas put forth behind a bunch of leftist or left-leaning or liberal think tanks. And of course, you're going to have some obvious overlap there. Some of the ideas coming from various intellectual think tanks, well, obviously some of those are going to end up into the policy proposals of a politician. Therefore, people are making a big deal out of absolutely nothing here. Oh no, there's a conservative who has a bunch of ideas that overlap with a bunch of conservative think tanks. Ooh boy, clearly there's some kind of nefarious conspiracy between the two. It's just pure freaking hysteria, honestly. It's actually kind of embarrassing that Americans are biffed by this. Another thing I'd like to refute is MSNPC's blatant projection and
You say MSNPC.
misrepresentation of Chapter 9. It accuses Project 2025 of trying to abuse the U.S. foreign aid system to export culture wars. The problem is that if you actually read Chapter 9, which MSNBC probably doesn't actually want its viewers to do, you will find out that what Project 2025 actually does is it criticizes the Biden administration of doing just that. It criticizes Biden for using U.S. aid as a way of a form of global platform to pursue culture wars. So it's entirely just projection. I actually did a whole video of this on a MUH episode. I did a MUH culture wars episode. It's very common for some reason
That one looks really spicy.
for leftists to use culture wars as kind of a bizarre projection mechanism where they accuse you of doing what they're doing. It's very weird, and
That seems like a really spicy one to watch, guys.
if you read the book, it's actually very obviously false. The reforms that Project 2025 actually puts forth and actually recommends for U.S. aid is mostly removing certain things from it. For instance, removing DEI, gender, and climate equity programs from it. Their plan is actually about making it less partisan and more about just direct charity rather than having an agenda tied to it. And the vast majority of Chapter 9 goes into great detail how Biden did exactly what MSNBC is accusing the board of Project 2025 of doing here. It's completely absurd, and it shows just how little respect MSNBC has for its audience. Because they clearly don't believe that their audience is
Logo with the little fucking faces on it. Oh my god.
going to actually read the book and fact check them on this one. And lastly, I just want to go over some of Kamala Harris's lies about the project, as well as roasting PolitiFact a bit for rating one of her statements as half-true when it's pretty blatantly false. We have this right here of Kamala Harris stating in an ad, Project 2025 would defund K-12 schools, and PolitiFact rates this as half-true. Yeah, no, that is a full lie. Dismantling the Department of Education does not at
You don't
all
watch
in
anymore?
any way equate to defunding K-12 schools. Especially if you, again, read the book. It specifically states in the chapter about dismantling the Department of Education that the actual plan they have is to just return education to state control rather than federal government control. So
Yeah, this is like a thing I hear all the time about, like, oh, Trump wants to remove they want to remove the Department of Education or whatever. Like, they just want to destroy all education. It's like, no, they just want to make it more local.
would still be getting publicly funded under Project 2025's plan, it would just be getting funded on a state-per-state basis. That's not something you rate as half true. That's pretty blatantly false. Or at the very least, it should get a mostly false. But that doesn't matter, I guess, because for some reason the mass media has chosen to latch on to Project 2025
I'm more of a fan of local
than fear-mongering stick.
Federal on almost everything. I think the only things I really care about, the only things I think are probably better, like maybe immigration and like military, foreign diplomacy, probably it.
Honestly, kinda silly and kinda sad, because really, Project 2025 and the book A Mandate for Leadership is overall really just a plan, again, to implement a form of old bug light. It's really just a plan to take bureaucratic control away from people who have abused it. And in many ways, it's honestly kinda milquetoast and pretty basic and pretty general conservative Republican stuff, which is honestly kind of what you'd expect. I mean, if you just read the contributors list and see all the general conservative think tanks involved with it, it's not surprising at all that Project 2025 would, in reality, just be generic conservative stuff. And while the book is an interesting read if you want to get a conservative perspective of how multiple institutions within the federal government actually operate, overall, it's just not
more
as
reforms
important as people seem to think it is. Anyways, that is all.
I kind of agree with I kind of agree with Mentis on like I'd rather they like completely dismantle a lot of the agencies rather than I don't think that the argument of here, let me explain why. The argument of like, well, we're in power, so like let's just put our people in there and then now we'll be in power. Like the reason I don't like that is because that only holds up until the other side's in power. Right, and then when the other side's in power, now they do the same thing, and then we just repeat the cycle. If we just destroy the actual like agencies like now, then they can't do that anymore, and then it's to a state level. Everybody gets their own say on it, right? Yeah, it just becomes the ring should be ours. Exactly. You gotta just remove it, like make it more local. That way, everyone can live how they want, like their own, like every state has is kind of like its own again, every state has its own culture, has its own people, and then you can govern yourself based on that, right? There's a lot more accountability too that way because at a more local level, first off, you have like a lot more competition. At a more local level, people want to take care of themselves more because you can actually see the effects of the policy like on a local level, right? Anyway, that was MentisWave. I really liked that video. I should probably watch more stuff from MentisWave. I'll link you guys the